And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 47th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 339th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, October 5th, 2017. I am your host, Jared Morris. Let's begin this week how we begin every episode of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. As we all know, you almost always need NBA talent on your roster to win a championship, be it a Big Ten championship or certainly an NCAA championship. Well, after Indiana's exodus of NBA talent after last season, many are down on the Hoosiers entering this season because of the apparent talent drop-off. We'll see. Guys like Robert Johnson, Deron Davis, and Juwan Morgan are keys to this year's IU team having a good season, and none are currently making much noise on any NBA draft boards as of yet. But there is one Hoosier who is making some noise, and his development as a freshman is one of the major X factors for the 2017-18 season. I am, of course, referring to Clifton Moore, who went from unranked high school prospect to being listed as a late first-round pick in Draft Express's 2019 mock draft, all in the span of about a year. Archie Miller also contributed to the hype train a little bit, saying Moore is, quote, as gifted as any player I've ever been around. And while one should never read too much into short highlight vignettes posted on the official IU Twitter account, I must admit being more than a little excited seeing Moore effortlessly drain a three in one clip and then run the floor and finish a fast break in another. Now, who knows if he can defend, but the offensive skill is certainly impressive. Now, how much will Clifton contribute this season while he learns the college game and improves his conditioning and coordination? How good can he be as he starts to fulfill his vast potential? And how long will he even be in Bloomington if he does? These are all great questions. All I know is that, as I mentioned before, you need NBA-level talent to make consistent noise in college basketball. And while Archie is out there pounding the pavement, trying to recruit the best talent he can to Bloomington, he's already got at least one young player making significant NBA draft noise right now, which is undeniably a positive sign for the future. Now we'll see how much it means for the present. And by the way, our banner moment, as always, brought to you by Hoosier Proud. Our friends at Hoosier Proud recently got the okay to sell officially licensed IU gear, so congrats to Connor and the Hoosier Proud team on that milestone. Visit HoosierProud.com right now to see their initial line of Indiana T-shirts, as well as our Assembly Call logo T-shirts. Use the promo code AC at checkout, and you will get 15% off. Alrighty, let me now introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. He has now been sitting there stewing for several minutes after taking offense at my assumption that Robert Johnson isn't yet a big-time NBA prospect, which is fine because we're all stewing awaiting his preseason bracket projections since he is, one of the world's foremost authorities on bracketology. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your bottoms line from the past week in IU basketball?
Well, certainly any preseason bracketology, anything I had even begun to think about starting kind of went out the window last week, although there's a lot of uncertainty in the college basketball world. But I guess it's as good a way as any to kind of get into what's exciting about tonight. We're going to talk a lot of Big Ten preview and talk a little bit about what happened at IU's Media Day. And it's while it was good conversation and interesting stuff to talk about last week with Ryan and Galen about the scandal that rocked college basketball prior to our show last week. It is exciting to know that one, practice has begun, and two, we are actually previewing teams that we will see take the floor in a little bit over a month, I guess, when it's all said and done. So I think that part is exciting to me, and a lot of good things seem to be coming out on, some of the digital things and the social media things that IU's putting out are really exciting, and I think are doing a good job of gradually building that interest and that excitement as the season gets started, and this is just another way to do that for me.
All right, well, here is what we are going to discuss this week. I have a few lingering thoughts from IU's Media Day, and we're going to hit those right here to close our first segment. Then Andy and I, as you mentioned, Andy, we're going to dive into our Big Ten Conference preview. We're going to provide you with the biggest questions facing every Big Ten team entering the season, and then we're going to discuss where we think IU fits into the mix and give you our projections for the Big Ten this year. And time willing, we will also answer some of your questions. All of that coming here on Assembly Call Radio. And don't forget, if you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio, there are two great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, And of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall, which is another great way to connect with the show. Alrighty, real quick, before I give you my lingering thoughts on IU's Media Day, a word about this week's sponsor for Assembly Call Radio, SeatGeek. Remember that when you need tickets to anything, to a sporting event, to a concert, or really any other live event, SeatGeek is the best place to go to ensure that you get the best deal. Their app and their website are easy to use, and they have this color-coded deal rater that makes it really easy. I mean, super simple to see which tickets are delivering the best value at any given time. And here's a URL to keep handy when you're preparing to buy IU basketball tickets specifically. iutickets.shop, not .com, but .shop. When you type that URL into your browser, it will take you directly to the IU basketball page on SeatGeek's website. So if you want tickets to, say, Indiana's 2 exhibition games coming up on October 28th and November 5th, tickets available right now for as low as $17. You can check them out at iutickets.shop and get them right there from SeatGeek. And since that is our affiliate URL, we do get a commission whenever you use it and then end up purchasing tickets. In other words, you get a great deal on IU tickets. Another passionate IU fan will be there in the stands to cheer on our Hoosiers, and you help support the Assembly Call. So it truly is a win-win-win all around. And again, that URL is iutickets.shop. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, don't forget to use the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY. Use it when you make that first purchase, and you will get $20 back after that purchase. Again, the promo code is ASSEMBLY. All righty, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And Andy, really enjoyed the conversation that you and Galen and Ryan had last week, breaking down obviously the scandal and then also talking a little bit about Media Day. In a normal week, I feel like we would have talked about Media Day probably the whole time because there was, just a ton of goodies to come out of that, from what Archie said to what some of the players said. And there were, a few lingering things for me that I didn't get a chance to say, obviously, on last week's show. So I wanted to bring up here, and I'd love to get your thoughts on them too. The first one is, I've really been struck this offseason by the way that Archie has talked about Deron Davis. And I know I've mentioned it on previous shows, but he always seems to be, more or at least as effusive in his praise of Deron Davis as he is of anybody, maybe with the exception of Robert Johnson, who he's really gone over the top to praise. But he's also been especially candid in his critiques of Deron Davis. And I really take that as a great sign because I think it shows that Archie trusts Deron's maturity and his coachability. And again, you can obviously tell how much he appreciates Deron's natural gifts, his skill, his footwork. He talks about all of that, talks about, the offense running through him in a lot of ways. But I mean, he, in the comments at Media Day, flat out, basically called him, said that he gets lazy every now and then and that he and the coaches are really going to push Deron to not do that and to run the floor better and to concentrate more on defense. And I don't think Archie would do that if he didn't, A, have a great relationship with Deron already, and B, really believe that he would be able to take it. Because I think there's some players who might not be able to take that kind of candid talk about their game in public. And with how much is riding on Deron, I just continue to feel good that Archie feels comfortable talking about him that way publicly. What do you think?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting as you go back and you listen to more of those kinds of things. I think, what you said is true. One, that he can, kind of handle that kind of coaching critique, whatever you want to call it. Also, I think a good, not making an example of him in front of other guys, but, for a guy who is as important as anybody on the team, to know right out of the gate that he's not above, getting those kinds of comments from the coaching staff. And really, I think if you look back over the history of IU, some of the guys that, you think back to the Knight era, some of the guys that he probably loved the most were the ones that he was the hardest on. And I think, in many ways, I think people have, kind of Archie has a little bit more of that mindset. So I think you start to see that a little bit come out. But yeah, it's certainly clear that he is already getting a lot out of Deron and expects a lot of him. And I don't think that's going to, that's not going to stop. And I think it really sets the tone of, there's no way around the thought that they need a ton from him this season. They need him to stay on the floor. They need him to produce. So there's no sense to hide from that. You might as well put it out in the open because everybody knows it anyway.
Another quote I really liked, Archie said, role definition has really been interesting so far. I think that's where we are as a staff, teaching things the right way and then creating roles is something we're going to try to do here in the next 3 to 4 weeks. This is good, obviously, because as we know, last year's team was basically devoid of roles. They were positionless, but also role-less, unfortunately, and that really seemed to cause problems throughout the season. So hopefully this team will have a little bit more role definition than last year's team did. Here's the other quote that really stuck out to me, and it's a concept that I haven't really heard a coach put it in these terms before, but I love it. And this is when Archie was talking about Juwan Morgan, and he said, quote, Juwan really has an opportunity to create a new vision for himself from a basketball perspective. He's a tremendous kid, a hard worker, but I think he's having to learn a little bit about responsibility of production. And that term, responsibility of production, I just really like, because I think on every team you have certain guys that are responsible for certain elements of production. Like Archie has talked about from a scoring perspective this year. Obviously, you're looking at Robert Johnson and Deron Davis, and he kind of named Juwan Morgan as that third guy who's going to have to get in there and score. Well, when you look at Juwan's career so far, he's never really been expected to produce. Any points that you got from Juwan, in a lot of ways, were bonuses. You know, when you had, obviously, Yogi Ferrell playing his freshman year, and then as a sophomore, you got OG Anunoby, and you got Thomas Bryant, and James Blackman Jr., and Robert Johnson, a lot of other guys who can pick up that scoring slack. And I think part of what happened to last year's team is that guys who had responsibility for production weren't consistently doing it. Thomas Bryant was up and down, and James Blackman Jr. would be up and down, and Robert Johnson obviously was up and down. And so when those guys who are responsible for production aren't bringing it every game, it really can create kind of a rudderless team. And so I think this concept of responsibility of production is one I really like hearing Archie talk about. And I like that he's putting that onus on Juwan. I mean, Juwan is now a junior. Obviously, it's time for him to take that next step in his development. And I think we all agree if he's healthy, he's got a chance to really take a big step up, make a big breakout. But I just really like that phrase, that concept of responsibility of production. And it'll be interesting to see as we go through the season now, who are these guys that we're really counting on, and are they able to step up and be consistent producers like Archie and the team needs them to be, especially the older guys, so that the younger guys can come along without so much pressure.
Yeah, I thought the role comment was the one that was music to my ears, second most behind the 75% on defense, 25% on offense. But I think that was really important. I think the comments about Juwan just speak to that, and he almost went down person by person on the roster and saying, hey, we need to get shooting from this guy. We need this from these people. I mean, I feel like it's there's no sense being, kind of hiding behind different cliches and whatever about what he expects of the team, where I thought, some of the prior regime, there was just a lot of talk. You didn't really see it. And I think that's what we've seen from Archie from the beginning is he's going to lay it out, tell it like it is. And I think, no reason to hide his expectations for what he needs to get out of these guys. And certainly Morgan is one who, as you said, has, been able to be points were a bonus. He was kind of, clean up the glass, get a few putbacks here and there, but really was not that focal point. And I think to be able to come out and say, look, this is what we need from you. If this team's going to be successful, again, at no point during, Archie's tenure here has he ever, tried to hide behind anything other than here's what we want to do. Here's our plan. And I think while the plan so far has been largely around recruiting and things like that, I mean, I think he's now kind of laying out his plan for how this team's going to play, who's going to play what role, and what they're going to look like.
Yep. All righty. Coming up on the assembly call, we dive into the Big Ten Conference and go team by team, analyzing the biggest question facing each of IU's conference opponents. Stick with us. We'll do that next. All righty. 1356. Very nicely done. Hello to everybody watching on YouTube. Great to see you all here. Man, I opened up the YouTube page and there was just like this cascade of comments already right from the beginning of the show. It's awesome to see so much activity here live. I have to say, like, seeing so many people here live makes doing this, the live version of the show, so worth it. I think we were, not quite sure if we wanted to keep doing the live version, but now you see how many people are here, and it's awesome.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Okay, so that was 1356. So we have 12:04. Need to be out of here at about 11:47. So I figure I have this split up on the sheet, but we'll just go as far as we can. I'm gonna start it out just giving a little recap, so you can kind of chime in there.
Okay.
Where you want, but I'll just give a little recap and then we'll go one by one. And I'll kick the team to you. You lead it off, and then maybe I'll ask you follow-up questions, and then we'll just try and gauge the time.
Okay.
So that we can get through them all. And I tried to go good team, bad team, good team, bad team at the beginning, so people don't just tune out after we do like top 6.
Probably wise move.
You're gonna have to sit through Rutgers. I'm sorry. I guess we could have saved them for the end.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Alrighty. Cool. So let's you ready to just hop in and do this?
Yeah.
By the way, and just a quick heads up, if you're watching on YouTube live, I've been having awful internet issues. So if I suddenly just go blank or you can't hear me or my audio is bad, it's because my internet went out. So if I pop off, just hang tight. Andy will stay here and I'll get back on and tether on my phone or something. But the show will go on. The show will go on. All right. Let's
all right. I'm ready.
Let's do this. Okay. Here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my trusty co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And Andy, it is October. Practice has started. That means it's season preview time. You want to hear something crazy? We only have 3 shows counting this one before Hoosier Hysteria, which seems nuts.
Like, wow.
I know. It got here fast.
Life comes at you fast. You never know.
Yeah, it does. And it's awesome. But then the week after that is the first exhibition game. So, I mean, you guys know, our show is built on responding to things that happen on the court. So, once Hoosier Hysteria comes, we'll have a lot to respond to. Once you have the first exhibition game, we'll have a lot to talk about. So, if we want to do some real season preview stuff, we've got to do it these next few weeks. So we're going to start out previewing the Big Ten this week. We will really dive deep on the team the next couple of weeks after that, analyze some individuals. It's all in hopes of getting you ready for the season. But let's start this week with the Big Ten. Just a quick recap of last year's ugly results. Purdue obviously won the league at 14-4 by 2 games over Wisconsin and Maryland. Minnesota finished 4th, and then there was a 4-way tie for 5th between Michigan, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Iowa. And Indiana, as we all unfortunately remember, finished in a tie for 10th with Ohio State. Now, when you look ahead to this year so far, as you survey the preseason prognostications, it seems like most people have kind of settled in with a few clear tiers. You've got Michigan State head and shoulders above everybody, kind of the national title contender, the expected champion. I think they clearly have the best roster of any team in the Big Ten. Then you've got your safe picks after that. And the safe picks are teams that kind of have a combination of returning experience, plus they also had success last year. So it's pretty easy to envision them being good again this year, and that's Purdue, Minnesota, and Northwestern. And then you've got a group of X factors, which are teams that, lost big-time stars from last year and don't necessarily have guys, with a lot of experience that we've seen in this conference ready to step into those roles yet, even though they have some guys with potential. And that's Wisconsin, Michigan, Maryland, and Iowa. And then you've kind of got the rest of the teams. You've got a team like Penn State, which didn't really lose anybody, and they're very talented, but it's Penn State, so no one really knows what to expect from them, even though people think they will be better. Then you've got the teams with the new coaches, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio State. New coaches, a lot of question marks across all of those rosters, which obviously we're going to get into here. And then you have the football schools that are unlikely to really make any basketball noise this year, Nebraska and Rutgers. So that one contender up at the top.
Did you just call Rutgers a football school? Did I catch that correctly?
They're more a football school than they are a basketball school.
Well, we're waiting to find out what they're good at, but I'm sure it's out there.
They're really neither, but I was just trying to group them some way with Nebraska, and that felt like the best grouping.
Somewhere diehard Nebraska football fans are writing sternly worded emails to you.
Yeah, they are. They are. What do you think? Is that kind of what you think in terms of the tiers, Andy? Is that a pretty safe way to kind of, how we look at it going into the season?
Yeah, I think so. In most of the things that I've looked at, the Michigan State, Purdue, Minnesota, Northwestern quartet always seem to be kind of together, maybe not in the same order, with Michigan State typically first. And then you've got that next tier of the, Maryland, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa seem to be grouped pretty closely together in that group. I think once you get outside of those top few, there's a pretty big group of teams you could argue could finish anywhere from, 5th to 10th probably.
Yeah, and hold that thought, because when we get into our final segment, we're going to actually give our Big Ten projections and kind of where Indiana fits in. And I had a real hard time trying to rank those teams in the middle. I mean, it's kind of like throwing darts, I guess, although I feel much better at throwing darts than I do picking which of those teams. A lot of it could end up just being based on the schedule. But anyway, let's go one by one, and let's just go down some of these teams. Let's talk about the biggest question facing each team that they're going to have to answer to kind of hit the top end of their ceiling. And let's start right at the top, the team that really has the fewest question marks of anybody in the conference, and that is Michigan State. So what is the question facing them that will determine not just if they can contend and win the Big Ten, but possibly even be the Big Ten's first national champion since Michigan State?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all revolves around the sophomore guards and Josh Langford and Cassius Winston. I think those are guys who they're really deep in the front court. Obviously, Miles Bridges coming back was a huge boost for them. And so really it just becomes who's the guys in the backcourt. We know what Tum Tum Nairn is at this point in his 11th year of school, and he's not a guy who's going to be able to be counted on to score. And they really need Winston to provide that threat and really step in, and continue to run the show. Averaged about 5 assists last year. And Langford really might be the biggest one. They had a little bit of a dose of things without Aaron Harris toward the end of last year. And Langford had some injuries that slowed him early, but I think he's got to be a guy who produces, because there just aren't nearly as many options. If something doesn't work out with one of those guys, they don't have as many places to turn, at those positions. And so I think, if they can provide some stability from the backcourt in their sophomore seasons, I think they really can challenge for a national title. Otherwise, I think they can certainly still challenge for a Big Ten title. But I think, those guys are the difference between, winning the Big Ten versus, winning it all.
It's funny. I mean, Winston is definitely the biggest question mark, and yet he's a guy who had an assist rate last year of 46.7%, which is absurd. Now, he did turn the ball over 26.4% of the time, but still, obviously, many more assists than turnovers. And a guy who, for a point guard, had a pretty good free throw rate, too. I mean, he got to the line a decent amount and is a good free throw shooter. And so if he can play more efficiently, I mean, they're just going to be scary good with what they have down low. So,
I hope depth is ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I hope that question is not answered in the affirmative, but I think Winston had a pretty good season for a freshman point guard in the Big Ten Conference, and so you would have to think that he'll take another step with a little bit more experience, a little bit more maturity, and that will obviously go a long way towards Michigan State, fulfilling their vast potential. Okay, So let's go from Michigan State now all the way to the other end of the conference with Rutgers. And I guess the question is, are there even any questions worth asking about Rutgers at this point?
I mean, I guess you could ask whether they're going to, get out of the, last place. I think the big thing with them is just offensive efficiency. The talent level has started to rise a little bit. I think their new coach, Steve, I think it's Peichel is how you say it, or Peichel. I think he's going to be a good coach. And they've got a few solid players. Corey Sanders, Deshaun Freeman, Mike Williams are 3 guys who average at least 9 points a game. The problem is outside of them, there's really a ton of question marks. No one really established at that point, and so I think can they start to climb their way out of the basement, and that really becomes the question. And I think there's a chance they don't finish last, and that if they're going to do that, they have to get a lot better on offense. Their offensive efficiency numbers are pretty ugly from a year ago, so that's really the biggest thing that they need to improve on if they're going to try to get from 14th to 13th or 12th. And really, when you're starting from where they are, that's kind of how you need to set goals, unfortunately.
Well, Corey Sanders, his offensive rating last year was 89.8, which is actually lower than what Verdell Jones and Devin Dumas had their first season in Indiana. So that kind of tells you how inefficient Corey Sanders was.
Yep, that sets it up pretty well.
Because, I mean, Verdell obviously turned into a much better player, but his freshman year, there wasn't a lot of efficiency happening there. So you are listening to the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms. Let's keep going through the conference. Andy, let's go to Purdue. Big questions facing the Boilermakers. Obviously, they have to replace Caleb Swanigan. So what are the questions that they need to answer?
I think there's 2 ways they need to replace Swanigan. One is whether Vince Edwards can really step up, or Vincent, whatever he's going by now. I mean, can he really step up and be a star? I think he did a bit of that in the World University Games when they were able to participate in that over the summer. And I think as a team got a lot of practice time and will likely reap the benefits of that as they go. So I think if he is able to do that, a really versatile guy and just step into a more expanded role, I think that's a big piece. And the other piece is Isaac Haas. Can he stay on the floor long enough to really contribute even more? A guy who averaged, I think, about 12 points a game last year, despite at times struggling to stay on the floor, either because of foul trouble, just trying to find lineup combinations of could they play him and Swanigan together. And I think if he can do that, those things help. But they're stocked in the backcourt with guys like Carson Edwards and Dakota Mathias and PJ Thompson. So not a lot to worry about there. It's really can Edwards assume that role as the superstar of the team, and can Haas stay on the court?
Moving on to Nebraska, what is the important question there other than should Fo Pelini be named the AD at Nebraska?
I think
obviously yes.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is no, and that's a question we do know the answer to. What we don't know there's just a lot of roster turnover. They had I think 3 or 4 guys transfer. Ty Webster graduated, so really they have Glenn Watson, Jack McVeigh, and that's really about it. Back a couple other guys who were role players, and so they're counting a lot on transfers. And so the question really centers around whether those guys can contribute. They've got James Palmer from Miami, Isaac Copeland, who has a ton of talent, transferred from Georgetown. I think just found out he's going to be eligible at the beginning of the season instead of midway through. Grad transfer from Winthrop. They also have I think this guy's a freshman from Iceland, who I believe will go. His first name, if you shorten it, is Thor, and his last name is just ridiculous, Thorbjarnarsson. I can't even tell. It might not fit on his jersey. But the potential of a Thor in the Big Ten is exciting. And I think, a lot of pressure on Tim Miles coming into the season. They're going to be counting a lot on those newcomers, the transfers in particular, to really be able to produce. But I struggle to see a scenario in which they finish any higher than, maybe 12th, maybe 11th at best, based on, just the personnel and how they've looked the last couple of years.
God, if he has a cold shooting night and there's some announcer who thinks he's clever and wants to make some jokes about how he's from Iceland, let's hope
we've all heard the announcers on the Big Ten Network. Somebody is making that joke.
Oh, who is it? Sean Morris? He's definitely making that joke.
Oh, there's not a chance. Yeah, that's like a dad joke, so he's going to be all over it.
Yeah, it is. Okay, we got about 30, 45 seconds. Let's save Minnesota for next segment. Let's hit Ohio State real quick. What's the big question facing Ohio State?
They just don't have a lot of depth. They don't have a lot of scholarship players. And while I really like Chris Holtmann as a coach, it's a pretty tall order for him based on and even have enough players to really have a good practice. So I think it's just how quickly he can get them to come together. I think they're just playing a little bit from behind from a roster standpoint. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for them.
And they have a couple good players, right? Jayshawn Tate is still there. So, I mean, they've got some talent, but just not a lot.
He's really good. They just going to have to throw freshmen right into the fire immediately and have them play big minutes.
Yeah. All righty. Interesting. And, it's going to be interesting to see also what Holtmann can do on the recruiting trail, because obviously, like all the new coaches, he's got to get that going, get the talent replenished in Columbus to get that thing turned around. All righty. We just did the first half of the Big Ten. Coming up in our next segment, we will go through the rest of the teams in the Big Ten Conference, give you the biggest question facing them, and then after that, we'll give you our projected finish. That's coming up. Stick with us. All right. Right at 12:04. Well done, Mr. Bottoms. Okay, so we'll start with Minnesota. So let me move them down real quick on the sheet. So I think Brian is calculating. We're getting like an audience cumulative Big Ten predicted finish for IU. Where are we at on that, Brian? What's everybody picking? I thought I saw some 5th and some 6ths. Which is, nice and optimistic. I like that. What do you think what are your thoughts on Purdue, Andy? I mean, they're going to miss Swanigan, obviously, but I kind of think they're going to be pretty good if they get depth. I mean, I hate saying that, but
yeah,
I feel like they're being a little underrated this year because they've got good experience. I mean, good players.
Yeah, I mean, for as clear-cut a number 1 as Michigan State is, I feel like Purdue's a clear-cut number 2 from my perspective. I just, they've got experience, they've got balance, got some guys that can really play good defense, and obviously, losing him is a big deal. But I think if they can, if they can get a little bit more out of a number of guys, I think it can help make up for it. I mean, they're going to have questions about who's going to get, minutes at the at the 4, backing those guys up. But I really liked Edwards as a freshman. I mean, I think being able to play for as much extra practice and against the kind of competition that they did, more so than normal overseas trips in the off season. I think that's going to pay huge dividends. I know that came up a lot in the show that you guys did in Podcast on the Brink with the I forget his name, but
Brian Nimbert.
Yeah, and I think that really came through. And I think for a team where you need to find somebody else off the bench who's going to be able to produce, like to have those kinds of experiences to try to sort that out ahead of time, where you're not going to be sorting out on the fly during the season, is going to be pretty important.
You know what's interesting?
That was far too many kind words about Purdue, I will say. Also,
well, let's get them all out of the way now in the preseason. I've actually started to see Matt Painter's name like pop up on some lists for bigger jobs, like on a list for the Louisville job, and starting to see some kind of positive talk about him as, like a hot young coach that people are overlooking. Because I didn't realize what was the stat? Something about NCAA tournament appearances before the age of 45 or something, where he's like a lot higher on that list than you would think.
Huh.
So I don't know.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Hopefully that all starts to come crashing down this year. No, I think they're really good. So
I think they're. I mean, I don't necessarily see them being able to challenge Michigan State necessarily, unless something happens. But I also would be, hard pressed to think that they're, not really, that they wouldn't be right there in second place.
Yeah, Chad asked Young. I mean, what is Painter, like 46, 47? So I mean, he's young in terms of a coach.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know it was surprising. Maybe someone remembers where that article was or where that stat was and can post a link. Question: do we shower now after saying all those nice things about Purdue before we move on with segment number 3?
I mean, it's not a terrible idea, but probably in the interest of time, we can keep going.
Galen asked an interesting question. What if Michigan State isn't actually that great? I mean, that's possible, right? I mean, they you're relying a lot on Miles Bridges, obviously being an All-American. We talked about Winston, and they may not be all that great, but they sure as heck seem like the safest team in the Big Ten, in a Big Ten that isn't great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that could go wrong with them is like if Langford really can't play much at the 2, then there's really there's no clear alternative to who they would play at that position if he doesn't work out. And he's a guy that they really need to be able to make shots and space the floor a little bit. And Bridges showed flashes of being able to, shoot well last year, but not consistently. And I think that's going to be interesting too. Is like if they really want to play Jaren Jackson at the 4 and Bridges at the 3, I don't know what kind of spacing that gives them. It's a ton of talent on the floor with Ward, but I think that finding somebody who can knock down shots consistently is going to be pretty important. Yep. So if Langford can't be that guy, I don't know who that guy necessarily would be. So that's maybe a way that things could go awry.
All I know is we're going to beat him in Bloomington. So bring it on. All right. You ready for segment 3?
Yep.
Let's try to do this segment. I'm thinking, how much time do we want to leave ourselves for segment 4? Let's try and do this in, 15 minutes, something like that. I bet we can get through it in that amount of time.
Yeah, just try to keep you posted. I'm trying to pop back and forth between notes I have and the chat if you have something. So
yeah, I'll keep you posted in the chat.
Okay.
All right, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join right now or whenever it's convenient to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter, because if you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you really do need to be on our newsletter list. You will get our weekly 6-banner Sunday news roundups as well as our post-game analysis emails once the season starts. It is all free and it will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. Again, the URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, and we are doing our Big Ten preview episode going team by team, giving you the biggest question marks facing each Big Ten team heading into the season. Let's go with Minnesota, another one of those teams, Andy, that's kind of in everybody's top 4. They made a big leap last year going from 8 wins to 20-some wins and making it to the NCAA tournament. A lot of people are high on them. What are the biggest question marks facing Richard Pitino and the Golden Gophers?
Yeah, I mean, a few questions came to mind. One is shooting. They didn't shoot the ball particularly well last year, and so it's a question of whether they can improve upon that this year. Akeem Springs, which is really the only guy that they lost, it was one of their better outside shooters. So how does that part play out? They lost Eric Curry to injury, so it hurts their front court depth a little bit. And so I think that's a question mark. And the other is just how to play with expectations. They were, playing with house money for a good part of last year. It did well to really, come back and really surprise people. Now with the expectations on them, how does that fit together? But not a ton of questions about them from my perspective. I think the shooting is going to be the biggest one, but it's hard not to like, that trio they've got of Nate Mason, Amir Coffey, and Jordan Murphy. I think those are three really good players that provide some pretty diverse skills as you look on the roster. So other than could they come back to earth from how a lot of things went right last year and not this year, and they don't shoot the ball well. But I think overall they seem to be pretty deep, even with the loss of Curry.
And how does Richard Pitino deal with his dad possibly pestering him all season long and showing up at games since he has nothing else to do?
Oh, I can't wait to get tons of shots of the crypt keeper behind the bench doing his thing. So that'll be exciting.
All right, let's move on to Northwestern. A surprise in the Big Ten last year. Obviously, they made their first NCAA tournament. Now they play with the burden of expectations. And obviously, one of the big questions facing them is how will their home court situation impact the season? Because they are not playing their games at Welsh Ryan Arena while it is renovated. And I went to look because, I was just wondering how big of a home court advantage it was for them last year. And they were 5-4 both at home and on the road in Big Ten play last year for a total of 10-8. So it's not like they rode, like a 7-2 home record and that it projects to really hurt them. Now, obviously, you'd rather play your games in the comfy confines of your normal home gym. But at least based on last year, they were kind of 50-50. So maybe that won't be as big of an impact as it might be for another team. But how do you think that affects them? And then what other questions are big facing Northwestern?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's a big one. I think playing with the expectations is good. And in I think it was Brendan Quinn wrote some kind of questions for the Big Ten. And I think his question boiled down to how does a team that finished 10-8 in the league improve with essentially the same personnel? Now, I think part of that was, Scotty Lindsey was out for a while with mono during a stretch where they didn't play very well. But the other thing is schedule-wise, their Big Ten schedule doesn't stack up in their favor at all. They've got double plays against Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Penn State, all who would be in the in the top or at least in that kind of crowded middle group. And they only play Rutgers, Nebraska, Ohio State, and Illinois once. If you think those are the worst four teams, so I think schedule wise that could really hurt them. But I do think they have a lot of pieces that you like. They didn't lose a ton. They get Aaron Falzon back from injury that'll help replace some of the production of the couple role player type guys that did leave. So I think those are the big ones for me. The expectations is going to be a big one. Something that I kind of lump them in Minnesota in that same boat from that perspective.
And what about Illinois? The Fighting Illini have a new coach. They lost their best player off of last year's roster. What are the biggest questions facing them as they try to get out of the bottom of the conference?
Yeah, I mean, Underwood was able to turn things around really quickly at Oklahoma State. He did have Juwan Evans, who's an NBA draft pick last year, and I'm not sure there's an NBA draft pick on this particular roster. So, maybe his ability to turn things around quickly there is a bit limited. They're going to be pretty young. They've got some front court guys coming back who have a little bit of experience from last year, but I think, talent-wise on the roster, it's hard to see a ton there. And I think, it's a big question for me of how quickly they'll be able to, adapt to his system. I think there, potentially what questions may come up there from, some of the scandals where, a former assistant of his was involved in some of the stuff that went down. And so we'll see. I just don't know that the talent is quite there. It'll be a real test. If he gets them, to finish maybe even in the top 10 of the league, I think that'll be a real testament to his coaching.
This next team, I think, is one of the most intriguing teams in the conference this year, and that is Michigan. I mean, they obviously lose a lot with Derek Walton, Zach Irvin, the kid that went to the NBA, Wilson. But they've got some interesting players back, and they've got some really interesting newcomers, some transfers coming in that they're really banking on. But if those guys end up panning out, this could be a pretty good Michigan team. What are the biggest question marks facing the Wolverines?
I think it's really those transfers that's really going to form their starting backcourt in Jaren Simmons from Ohio and then Charles Matthews, who sat out last year after he transferred from Kentucky. I think if those guys can prove to be good, they've got a really, really solid starting five. And Beeline is one that I'll trust to kind of figure out things around those guys. Now, if that doesn't work out, then there's not really, there's not really a clear-cut option to fill the roles of either one of those guys. And I think, as well as, Walton was playing as well as anybody in the league by the end of last season. And so, that's a really big loss. To lose 3 double-digit scorers is a big deal. For me, I just think Beeline is such a good offensive coach that he's going to get the most out of the guys that he has. But I think, to me, it starts with that backcourt.
You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, previewing the Big Ten Conference. And let's just keep rolling right along, Andy, and let's talk about Penn State. You have listed here on the notes, can they finally break through? What are they, Indiana football?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I feel like we've been talking about, everybody gets excited about, Penn State. They started to get, better players in, and you kind of wait for them to have that breakthrough season. It just never really happens. And so I think they're a little bit like Michigan, where it's pretty easy to like their starting five, and then after that, there's a lot of questions. Tony Carr and Lamar Stevens as freshmen last year played really well. Mike Watkins, I think, was a redshirt freshman a year ago, and so I think those guys are good. Shep Garner has shown some ability to shoot the ball, but you get past those guys, they really didn't have a lot of great recruits come in, and so if anything doesn't work with that starting lineup, who else do you really have? And quite honestly, it's with history as our guide, it's kind of, you got to show me that you can actually do it at the point before I'm going to project them a little bit higher. But the talent level is unquestionably better than what it has been there, and certainly one of the best teams since Pat Chambers has been there. But at some point, you actually have to do it. And they started to kind of show progress last year, and then they would stub their toe and really play poorly down the stretch.
Yeah, and Carr and Stevens are both guys that Tom Crean was recruiting pretty heavily at Indiana too, and they ended up going to Penn State. So it'll be interesting to watch them continue to progress.
They lost at home to Rutgers last year, for heaven's sake. So what more can you say?
Oh my, that's
with the same guys that are on this year's team. So if you've done that, how can we trust you going forward?
That's an excellent point. All right, let's talk about Maryland. Again, another team like Michigan, like Wisconsin, that lost some important players off of last year's team, namely Melo Trimble. What are the biggest question marks facing Maryland?
I think it's really who steps up outside of those three freshmen. I think you have a pretty good idea what you're going to get out of Jackson, Cowan, and Herder as sophomores. Is certainly up their production. I think all three will end up scoring in double figures. But outside of them, there's a lot of questions, particularly in the front court, whether Sikorsky can be a guy who you can count on. He got hurt last year in the middle of the season, but had played better at that point. They got Sean Obi, a transfer from Duke, a guy named Bruno Fernando, which just from a name perspective is pretty good. Not as good as the Thor guy from Nebraska, but Bruno Fernando is pretty fun to say. So that's good. But I think those are really the big questions for me: is can they get consistent production, from a role player standpoint, and guys outside of those three. And I think there's reason to be excited about them. I thought the podcast on the Brink you guys just did this week with Roman, I think was his name. I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, Roman Stubbs from the Washington Post.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought it was good, and I think summed up pretty well, like the things you like about them, but there's definitely questions. So they're a team that schedule wise has some interesting things going on as well. But I hard not to like that trio of sophomores. That's for sure.
Next up is Iowa, and I feel like as we get closer to the season, I'm starting to see more and more positive buzz about Iowa. People thinking this team has a chance to maybe surprise some people, and if their young players can develop. Obviously, they lose a huge player off of last year's team, Peter Jock, who used 28.5% of their possessions, which is obviously a pretty good amount, and was a really good scorer. How do they replace all of that production? And is that the biggest question facing the Hawkeyes?
Yeah, from my perspective, it is. I think, he made things easier for everybody around him because of the attention that he drew defensively. And so, they have a ton of guys who got experience. They played a lot of players, last year. I think, it's kind of come up in the IU game where, he played 12 guys in the first 5 minutes of that game or something. And so you got, guys who are coming, the Tyler Cook, Jordan Bohannon, a couple guys who I think will be sophomores and give them a good foundation. And yeah, but it's you're certainly going to be asking guys, or a collection of guys, to take on the role that Jack did as really the focal point of the offense. And while there's probably some guys who are able to do that, it's unclear who that focal point becomes. And the other thing is they were really bad defensively a year ago, and so how they fix that will be important, because they certainly could score it even last year with Jack. Will probably be able to do so again this time around. But if they can't stop anybody, we know all too well how that story ends.
And last but not least, look, Ryan is not here tonight, but in his honor, because he would want it this way, we saved Wisconsin for dead last. So let's talk about the Badgers, who may be facing more questions than anyone in the conference, given how much they've lost. Because after their decade in Madison, Bronson Koenig, Nigel Hayes are gone, and now look, the Bo Ryan era is kind of over now, and it's Greg Gard's turn to really do it and put his stamp on this program. What are the questions facing Wisconsin, Andy? And is this finally the year that Wisconsin doesn't finish in the top 4?
I feel like it might be. I mean, if ever there was a year, this feels like it would be it. I mean, you have Ethan Happ, and outside of that, Demetric Trice is really the next guy that you feel like you know what you're going to get out of him, and beyond him, you really just don't know. I think they did an overseas trip in the summer and had some different guys step up based on some of the things that I read. But again, they're certainly you're kind of counting on them to be the same Wisconsin that they have been, where an obscure guy that nobody really knew about steps into a prominent role. And they kind of don't skip a beat. And so they really need that. And I think, the other question is really, you've got Greg Gard. If you want to make, he certainly was there, but it was did he win with Bo Ryan's players? And now these are a lot more his guys than Bo Ryan's. And how does that all come together? I think it just becomes a question of how much you trust their system and what they built there, where they truly are just kind of interchangeable pieces as different guys come and go. And, have they groomed guys along the way to really step into these prominent roles? But it's a lot of prominent roles that need to be filled.
Boy, it sure is. I mean, Wisconsin has felt like such a stable force in the Big Ten for so long. I can't remember the last time they faced so many questions coming into the season. It's always felt like they've just kind of had this assembly line of you knew who the next guy was going to be that would kind of step up, and now, I mean, it really feels like it's wide open for them. So it's going to be they're another one of the more intriguing teams, because if they did finish in the top 4, I don't think anybody would be shocked. But if they really struggled and finished 9th or 10th, I mean, that would kind of be surprising, but I don't know if it would be shocking, just given how many holes they have.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one where they've lost, key guys before. They've lost, the Jordan Taylors and some of those kinds of guys, but they've always really had somebody ready to step into those roles. I don't feel like they've had quite the same losses, even as from that Final Four team when they lost Decker and Kaminsky. There was still that foundation of guys that really allowed them to not lose momentum. Now most of those guys are gone, and it's really Happ. And again, I think you're going to start to wonder, like, how much is he benefiting from the attention that those other guys got, where he now becomes the focal point? Does he get sent to the line more? Free throw shooting was a big deal for him last year. Does he actually get called for traveling? I mean, who knows? A lot of things could happen. We'll have to wait and see.
Does he become a great 3-point shooter? That's another emerging story.
Does he become a great shooter outside of the lane? Is really, you got to take baby steps first.
Oh, we will see. All righty, coming up in our final segment, we've asked the questions. Now we're going to give you our projected finish, including where Indiana fits into the mix. That is coming up. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right, that was 14:28. So we are in good shape. So we have
like 9:32.
9:32. So we actually have 8:56. We got to be out of here.
All right.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's hit this up. Let's give our predictions, and then I've got a few questions on Twitter we can go through. If we someone asked a question, if you could choose one, who you got? Guyton, Yogi, or Damon? Like, choose one for a one-on-one game to run the team. That's kind of it's a difficult question. Yeah. Like, if it's just someone to go get you a bucket, I don't know, that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
Depends on the context. But who would you go with? You got it. Just one of those guys.
Well, pick a context, and I'll answer to the context that you pick.
Just to have on an Indiana team, you get the best version of this guy for one full season. Best version of him for one full season. You would get senior year Yogi. You wouldn't get like sophomore year Yogi.
Man, that's a hard one. I'm inclined to say Yogi.
I'm inclined to say Yogi too.
The only thing that I think, well, one, because we obviously saw the how much it sucked. Maybe this is recency bias, but to not have to not have him over the last season. I think we saw what that really meant. Damon Bailey might be the second one because I think he did some of the same.
I know.
Where it could do a little bit of everything.
But here's the thing: if you have,
but it's hard to like put that in the context of like. I'm also in my head. I'm thinking like, well, like current day, would we do that? And like, yeah, I don't know. So I guess I'll say Yogi, just because I think probably harder to find a like true point guard, run the team type guy than maybe guys that could fill those other roles.
Yeah. Yeah. And when he was locked in on defense, he was a really good defender too. So,
yeah.
But, maybe if you already have a point guard, then you get a guy like Damon who could just do so many different things,
Yeah.
So
if you had asked the question you said where it's like somebody just to go get you a bucket, I probably would have answered AJ Guyton. So,
well, yeah. And just a half court set, go get you a bucket. Yeah. I'm probably taking Guyton too.
yeah. So, yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I know that, but that's what makes those kind of questions fun. Okay. Here's one more for you. I don't know if you saw this question on Twitter today, and I want to get everybody's thoughts in the chat too. And to a certain extent, I think your answer to this question shows your age. More impressive. No, you'll have frame of reference for both of them. More impressive, just random, outrageous outburst against Duke. Andre Patterson in '96 when he went for 38 points, 8 boards, and Indiana beat Duke. I think it was was that in the championship or the preseason NIT? Or
yeah. I'm fairly certain it was. I think he played well in the semis as well, but not like that. But
like
yeah,
Dick
I think he had a really good game
from that performance.
He did, because I think he had played a good game before that, even though I don't remember who it was against. But I do feel like he played really well in the semifinals, and then he played like that, and then everybody was like, "Man, this guy, this is what everybody expected when he signed."
Yeah. Okay, that or Marco Killingsworth against Duke, which was more than a dunk. I mean, he had 32 points and kind of single-handedly kept the team in the game until Duke ran away with it. I think the Marco Killingsworth one is more memorable because of the individual moment and because 50,000 people were in the arena that night to see it, which is amazing. And it, but I think the more impressive performance overall was Patterson's. What do you think? More impressive, not more memorable.
I would say Patterson. I mean, one, they actually won the game is the other. But yeah, he was just unconscious from everywhere.
Yeah, I know. It was amazing. It was amazing, man. If you talk about responsibility for production, if Patterson had been a guy that, and actually by the time he was a senior, he was much more consistent and better. But
yeah,
man,
he never reached, like, that was the game that was like he reached the ceiling of what everybody expected, and then he eventually kind of like worked his way into this range where it wasn't really like a high ceiling guy, but he had a pretty high floor where you knew pretty much what you're going to get from him, but it was never going to be nothing could ever be what that game was. But yeah, he was pretty incredible now.
Yeah, he was. All right, let's do this. You want me to run through mine first? And then you give yours?
I don't know how you want to do it. I don't know if there's an easy way to break it up, either where we could kind of go, well, here, let me look. Maybe we could.
Yeah, okay. We both probably have let's do this. We both probably have the same.
Let's do the top 4 and we can talk through the order.
Yep.
And then I'd say probably then you do 5 through 10.
Okay.
And then 11 through 14 are probably their own thing. I think those are kind of the delineations where there's stuff to look at.
And then maybe you defend your biggest outlier, your biggest surprise pick. So.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay. Here we go. Let's do this. What did I say? We have 8:56. All right. If we're getting close, I'll just put my finger up if it's getting close to the time and you're talking.
A little fracas here in the in the football game.
Oh, is there?
I'm not sure what happened. I just looked up and there's lots of guys going at each other, but I'm not exactly sure what happened.
No. Protect yourself, Tom Brady. Stay safe. Okay.
Their defense is on the field, so.
Oh, well, that's good.
So he's safe, right. Unless he's coming off the bench swinging his helmet around, which would be exciting.
All right.
Hey, in a real surprise move, Deshaun Jackson was somehow involved in the middle of it. That's a stunner.
Interesting.
Such an even-keeled guy that he is. That's surprising.
Very interesting. All right. Here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Wrapping up, we are doing our Big Ten preview this week. We just went through and gave you the biggest questions facing every Big Ten team. Obviously, we didn't talk about Indiana, but we're basically going to spend the next 2 weeks previewing all of the many questions facing the Hoosiers. So tune in the next couple weeks, obviously, for those previews. One thing I want to say real quick here, Andy, before we reveal our projected orders of finish, is it's really important to remember the impact of unbalanced scheduling, because what is it? Each team has a double play against 5 different teams. So, I mean, it's far from a true round robin. We know that. And so, who you play in your double plays, where your single play games are, who the teams are that you play just on the road or at home, it matters. It makes a difference. And it could be the difference between, a couple of teams like Michigan and Wisconsin that a lot of people think are, pretty similar, and heck, throw Iowa in there, throw Indiana in there, some different teams. Who finishes 5th and who finishes 9th could, in a lot of ways, not even be based on just who's the best team, but what the schedule is. And, you never want to kind of blame or talk about things that the team has no control over, but it is what it is. And, just as an example, you mentioned this, Northwestern has a really tough schedule. They play their double play, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Penn State, Wisconsin. Those are all teams that, a lot of people think are going to finish in the top half of the conference this year. They have to play them all twice. On the other hand, Michigan State plays Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, and Wisconsin twice. Illinois and Rutgers, a couple teams that most people think are going to be 10th or worse. And obviously Indiana is a team that people project, all over the place, but, a lot of people 8th, 9th, 10th. So not only do they have the most talented roster, but they also have what looks like the easiest schedule. Now, it's tough to project at the beginning of the year, but it is worth stating that that is something that could and probably will have a big impact on the Big Ten race.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I was looking back through the post that Alex did Inside the Hall, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's one of these things where everybody does the same thing in the NFL, where it's like, oh, here's the strength of schedule, and then turns out you don't know crap about half the teams by the time it's all said and done. So, who knows? What we think now may not be the case, but I mean, we certainly have seen over the last couple of years how much of a factor that has been. So there's no reason to believe that it's not going to play at least some role in it this year. I don't know that Michigan State needs any help, but the schedule certainly looks like it gives it to them to a certain extent.
All right, so let's reveal our projected orders of finish for the Big Ten this year, and we'll do it in tiers, not like crying, but, tiers of teams. Let's start with the top 4. I think we'll probably have certainly a similar top 4, maybe even the exact same. Pretty sure we both have Michigan State and Purdue 1 and 2. Who do you have 3? Are you going with Minnesota?
Yeah, I have Minnesota. I think partly the schedule, and I just think partly the personnel I like a little bit more than Northwestern, who I had 4th. But I do think there's a line between those 4 teams, no matter what. I said before about Northwestern and the whole 10-8 with this roster and things like that. I think Chris Collins is doing a really good job with them. So yeah, I've got those same 4.
And I had a little bit of a hard time at number 4 because I like Northwestern, but the schedule, the upheaval, not being able to play at home. I wonder. I would not be shocked if they fall down a little bit. But as I sat there looking at it, they had fewer questions than the other teams below them, and they have a senior point guard in Bryant McIntosh. So I felt safer putting them 4th than anybody else. So I kind of went with them by default, but I would not be shocked if someone jumped up and booted them out of that slot, but we will see.
Yeah, I think the depth and just overall personnel of those top 4 feels just different to me than anybody else's, where you've got pockets of players that you'd like on most of the other teams, but I think those 4 seem to kind of set themselves apart a little bit in that way.
All right, so you want to go 5 through 10 next?
Sure. That's probably the next logical grouping, unless we've got something crazy. But
okay, so why don't you reveal yours first?
All right, so I had Michigan 5th, Maryland 6th. I waffled on this one. I'm going to put IU 7th, and then just ahead of Wisconsin, who I had at 8th. Then I had Iowa 9th, Penn State 10th.
Wow. Okay. So we have some similarities there. So I had Penn State 10th. I had Iowa 9th, Maryland 8th, Wisconsin 7th, Michigan 6th, and I've got Indiana finishing 5th. And let me give you some reasons why, so that you don't just think this is me with my crimson colored glasses on. But you
never fail to disappoint in that regard. So all right.
But here's the thing. I sat there at number 4. It took me a while, and I finally said Northwestern. And then I'm looking at all these other teams, And it's really hard to separate them. So here's for me what separated Indiana from these other teams and why I feel more comfortable putting them there. And part of this may just be, the kind of the bias of being up close and because I know more about Indiana, some of the questions to other people feel less like questions to me. I will grant that. But here's what I know. This team has experience, and they've got experience in the backcourt with Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk. We know that's important, along with the experience of Colin Hartman. I think the focus on last year's biggest issues, defense and turnovers, if Indiana can improve even marginally in those two areas, it will help out a ton. We know that. I also think we may be people, the national pundits may be a little bit overrating the losses. Not to say that Thomas Bryant, OG Anunoby, and James Blackman Jr. weren't terrific players at times, but, Bryant was better as a freshman. OG missed half the season, and sometimes IU's been better without Blackman in the lineup. So I think the lack of that top-tier professional level talent lowers Indiana's ceiling, but I actually think we might be more consistent and even tougher with the lineup that we have. I think there are several legit breakout candidates. We talked about Deron Davis. I'm not going to be shocked if he's second team, third team, all Big Ten. I think one of Curtis Jones or Devontae Green could really break out. And then I think you've got a couple of freshmen in Clifton Moore and Justin Smith that by the time January, February rolls around, those are guys who could have impact like what OG and Juwan had as freshmen when they really became big players off the bench. And then I think the schedule is tough with the one-day turnarounds, but Indiana also does get to play Illinois and Ohio State twice, and Rutgers and Nebraska are single plays on the road. So you don't have to waste a home game against those teams. So to me, you add all of that up, and I think there are fewer question marks for Indiana than the other teams, but I'm willing to hear your arguments that maybe I'm a little bit biased. But to me, when I look at it, trying to be as analytical and objective as possible, I think you can make a very reasonable argument that Indiana finishes fifth. But because of how close all these teams are, it's not like it would take much more than one or two losses to knock you down to maybe ninth or 10th. I mean, it's a razor-thin margin, I think, when you get with those teams that are 5 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me that Iowa finished fifth, I wouldn't be shocked. I really like them. I kept them at 9, largely because of the defensive questions. And I think, while they have a lot of guys back, they might miss Jock a little bit more than people think. But I wouldn't be stunned if they really jumped up and finished a lot higher. I think you could almost draw these teams out of a hat. And so from the standpoint of, kind of what you described, I think we just have more faith in some of the answers to the questions that people have about IU maybe than other people do. So I think that's fair. For me, I had them between 7th and 8th. Kind of waffle. I do think they're going to be better than what people are projecting them at. I do think by the end of it, they're going to be right on the bubble, and I would expect the Big Ten to get in the 7 to maybe 8 team range. So that's kind of why I stuck them in there, kind of just in the middle of that tier, because I think they've got the chance to be a little bit better than that, but I think they've got the chance to finish 9th as well. You know what I mean? So
yep.
I wouldn't be stunned if they finish 5th. I think the schedule points you bring up are important, and I think as we start to see these teams play a little bit more, might be a little bit easier to kind of tell what that is. Michigan for me was largely because of Beeline. I kind of broke the tie just because of what I think of him. And I think, Penn State, kind of what I said before, they've been good at it. It seems like they should break through, but haven't seen it. So kind of placing them in a way that says they won't get there since then. So I don't know if we got time to run through our last 4 quickly, but
really quick. I've got Ohio State, Illinois, Nebraska, and of course, Rutgers finishing up. 5 seconds. Who you got?
I got the same, except Illinois and Ohio State flipped. I just think I like Underwood, and he's got a little bit better personnel than Ohio State.
All righty. Well, that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of our live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers. Excellent. We nailed the timing on that.
Oh, that was good. Yeah, I totally forgot about the other teams, and I saw you put the time in the chat. I was like, oh, crap.
I mean,
yeah, 4 teams. Not that we needed to spend time on them, but at least to complete the exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's the other thing is, with the breakout candidates, like I feel good about Robert Johnson. I feel pretty good about Juwan Morgan as long as he can stay healthy. It's going to be interesting to see who breaks out. Like, I've been pretty excited about, I mean, obviously that was the banner moment, but what people have been talking about with Clifton Moore. And now, people are, I think, underestimating Justin Smith a little bit. So, I mean, I think those two guys could become players by, the middle of Big Ten, the end of Big Ten play. And then I think you just need one of Curtis Jones or Devontae Green to step up. Hopefully both of them do, especially Curtis if he can shoot. But, if those things happen, I mean, there's no reason why this team can't be pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think what you said, just because we know the team, the personnel a little bit better than other teams. Man, I think if I step back and I said, I have these questions about, what I said about Michigan, they got a pretty good starting five. What else are you going to get from anybody else? I think if I didn't know as much about IU as I knew, you could sit there and ask the same question and say, hey, look, starting five that you think they're probably going to roll out there seems pretty good. But beyond that, what do you really think of anybody? And so I think that's a fair point to look at that. I think McSwain is another guy who you really haven't heard a whole lot about, but I just feel like he could fit well with what Archie wants to do and be that energy guy for, 8 minutes a game and, spell Duran a little bit if he needs to. He's undersized, but, kind of get a lot out of him athletically. Just so
come in there and get his 6 offensive rebounds and his 1 putback.
Yep, exactly.
And use up his fouls. I think
simple as that.
I think Freddie's going to have some important minutes. I think there'll be games he doesn't play at all, but I think he'll, especially if the team is like lacking energy. Like, he strikes me as the kind of guy that you put in when maybe the starters don't bring it or you're just kind of struggling. Mm-hmm. Put him in there. He'll go make a few plays for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. It'll be interesting. Yeah, that middle tier of the Big Ten. The Big Ten's going to be fun to watch, I think. I mean, I put Penn State at 10th. Like I said, I think they could finish a lot higher. It's just haven't done it. And I really do like Iowa, but I just kind of, when I sat down, I was like, after watching a team that was so bad defensively, I'm like, can they really improve that much? But they actually, I was looking at some of their efficiency numbers from a couple of years prior, and they were actually fairly good.
Yeah, but it's more fun to imagine Iowa sucking and just thinking about Fran McCaffrey
losing his mind. Yeah, there's no question about that.
It's clearly more
no
fun
question about that at all.
All right, so let's we need to game plan how we want to break up the preview the next 2 weeks, because I mean, we should basically just think of it like we basically have 2 hours to cover it all. So maybe we do, I don't know, backcourt one day and front court another day, and really dive into the players. I know. Let's think about what the if we want to go through going through the schedule. I know. I mean, we want to talk about the schedule, but like going game by game and all that stuff, I think that's kind of pointless because so much.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I don't want to do that, but yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think we could talk like briefly. I mean, like I said, kind of like I've been doing with the Big Ten, just keeping track of other conferences as previews come out. So just being able to real high level say, hey, here's the non-conference teams, the ACC teams IU plays are like the consensus, three of the top 5 teams in most, and then the other leagues, it's a lot of like middle of the pack teams. There's nobody who seems to project particularly high from the mid-major or low major type leagues, but not too many that project to be toward the bottom except for Howard and South Florida.
Brian Tonsoni said AC After Dark about to start. I feel like I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I feel like Assembly Call After Dark is much more compelling when Ryan is here, because like he's got more stories. He's liable to just say something crazy.
Possible.
So, yeah. Possible. So, Assembly Call After Dark. Better with Ryan Phillips.
Although Galen had some good stuff last week with his some of the theories about why they went after certain teams. So that was good.
But that was just straight up like good basketball analysis.
Common thread is that you and I are not good for this part of the show.
To be clear, I'm not talking about post-show stuff. We could sit here for an hour and have compelling post-show talk. Ryan talks about the stuff that is like, more R-rated. That's Assembly Call After Dark, where you got to put the children to bed. So let's see. We did get a couple of questions. Alex asked if there's any recruiting news. There hasn't really been any recruiting news this week. Chad said, do you think the 2 visiting guards declare during Hoosier hysteria? That would be awesome. I doubt it. Obviously.
I think you just see more and more people push back their decisions if you were in that position, it having nothing to do with whether you buy into the stuff that IU has had out there where nobody's been contacted. Like if you're a top level recruit,
I would wait.
Obviously you can get out of some of these things, but there's very little incentive even less than there normally is to make a decision early. So I think you're going to see more and more kids wait to try to give themselves as much time to see how things sort themselves out. So I would be surprised about that. And I think that's the other reason that you haven't heard a whole lot, particularly about, those two in the 2018 class. The people they're really still in on are not guys who we would anticipate making decisions anytime soon. So other than kind of staying on the path they're on with those guys, there's not a ton to do or to learn.
I mean, if it was going to be either one of them, I think it would be Garland, because I think Romeo really is committed to taking it into the spring. And Garland does seem like he's down to 2, and he could come to Bloomington and get as wrapped up in it as obviously his dad is, because his dad always speaks very highly of IU. So I could kind of see that one, but I know if I was the parent of a high school player, I would be waiting. Well, if I was as high profile as those two guys and I knew a scholarship would be waiting for me, and I think they both know that they can play at IU if they want to.
Now, as a father of someone who will have to pay for school for kids, if I was in that position, I'd be like, just take the damn scholarship now. It doesn't matter. But that's it's easy for me to say in my current situation, where if somebody would offer, something to one of my children today, I'd be like, absolutely, we'll do. Makes total sense.
Certainly. Last question. Brian says superstitions that you guys have on game nights. Do you have any superstitions for game nights?
No, not really. I'm more one like like when they made a run to the national championship game, I would wear kind of the same. Well, one, I would watch the game the same place every time when that run kind of started. So it didn't even matter what was going on and who was around. I would watch the game the same place, and I would kind of wear the same stuff, like the first game of the weekend and then the second game of the weekend.
Yeah.
But no, otherwise, I feel like I don't anymore. I probably used to have a lot of them, but I think doing the show has like gotten me away from some of that stuff, because I'm more thinking about like things I need to do for that, as opposed to stuff that it's consuming my mind with things that really probably don't matter, but I talk myself into thinking that they matter. So
yeah,
I feel like you have some though, right?
Well, so it's a combination. Like I have some superstitions that kind of go from season to season. Like for big games, I wear my shooting shirt, my candy stripe pants, my lucky IU shoes, but only for big games. Like I kind of feel like they have so much juice in them per season, and so I only bust them out for big games. And their record is pretty darn good, I have to say. Like obviously I busted them out for the Kansas and North Carolina games last year, and we won those games. Now, had I worn them for the Butler game, maybe we would have played better, or the Fort Wayne game. Who knows? Maybe I missed opportunities there, but bust those out for the big games, and then things will develop through the season. So in 2015, I started eating a frozen pizza before the game, and that was when the winning streak started. So then I was eating the particular type of frozen pizza before every game, and it became a thing. And I'm fairly certain that I didn't have a chance to make the frozen pizza before the Michigan game of the Big Ten tournament, and we know what happened there. So see? That's those
are decisions you've got to live with. So
well, they are. I know. So yeah, so they kind of develop if things are going well in a certain direction. What about you guys? Let us know. The one thing I realized about the YouTube chat is as soon as I hit stop broadcast, like it goes away and it disappears forever. So it's a very ephemeral conversation that's going on. So I hate to like stop it, and then we should give people like a couple minute warning and let them know that we're gonna be stopping it. But yeah, so you're good for next week?
Yeah, I should be. I think the Eagles are on Thursday Night Football, but I might be willing to make such a sacrifice to.
Well, if Ryan's on the show, he'll spend most of the time talking, so you'll probably be able to watch most of the game.
I can still watch. I mean, I have a TV on like right in front, so I'll try to remain engaged as possible. So, but yeah, I should be okay. I don't think we have anything coming up that I missed as we kind of start ramping up, and then we'll probably have to figure out when the season gets closer with all these like quick turnarounds if there's ones that we want to try to take off or shift in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and you and I have to communicate that, especially since we're the two that host it. As long as one of us can be there, typically. So Ryan can just show up 2 minutes early. And
What? Wait, when was that? Was I not there the time you showed up 2 minutes early? No, I must have missed that one. So we'll just have to figure it out. I don't know when the I know there's some Friday games, and I believe I don't have Mallory's basketball schedule, but I think those are going to be Fridays. So those early in the season Fridays, I might be out for, depending upon
Fridays
when the
should be
game,
good days for me. So
depending upon when the game time is, at least, and I'll know more about her stuff coming up pretty soon.
Cool. I'll get a spreadsheet together, and we can just make sure that we're covered for all the games.
Yeah, got to fire up the old BTN Plus subscription again.
Oh yeah,
for the obligatory 1 month to get the games and do all that. So, but I assume that they'll have more of the student broadcasters do that, which I actually always enjoy. Not for many reasons, not the least of which is that they're often better than the people who do the regular season games.
No question about it.
They certainly know the team a little bit better than some of the guys who do it later in the season.
I know.
Hell, even in the postseason, for that matter, in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to you, Chris Webber.
That's right. That's right. All right, everybody. That is all we have for you this week. Thank you for being here live. It's always great talking with you, and we'll be back next week. Probably, I'm thinking it'll be you, me, and Ryan the next couple of weeks.
Hopefully we can.
We got to get some reps together.
Yeah,
for the season.
Yep, that's true.
Cool. All right, man.
Sounds good.
Have a good night. I will talk to you all next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.